Computer. Okay, fantastic. I'm recording, and this is the third part of Write Essay. In the first part, we looked at the introduction. In the second part, we looked at the arguments, the two body paragraphs. In this webinar, we're looking at how to tie it all together by writing a fabulous conclusion, okay? There are literally hundreds of people in here, so I'll stop at certain points and you can ask questions. Please try to use the Q&A function to ask your questions. Right, so the overall structure of your essay, as you know, you have an introduction, you have an argument 1, you have an argument 2, and then you have a conclusion. They are the 4 paragraphs that you need to write, and you need to write between 200 and 300 words. You have 20 minutes to do it. Let's have a look at the introduction. I'm going to briefly recap what we learned in the other webinars. So the formula for the introduction we learned was this. The first sentence you write is like a background statement on the question topic. Something broad, something sort of basic, something relevant to the question prompt. The second sentence, you then rewrite the question in your own words. You paraphrase it, you change it into your own words. And the third sentence of your introduction is where you write, "This essay will." And we found out that that's a particularly important sentence to write because it leads, it gives direction to your essay. What you tell the reader you will tell them, you better tell them, or else you'll get a low mark. For example, if we go back to this question prompt, vegetarianism is more ethical than eating meat. We have a background statement here that says vegetarianism has become increasingly popular. Then we rewrite the question and we write, people often choose to become vegetarian because it is considered to be more ethical than being a meat eater. Then we write that this essay will sentence, and this essay will discuss the reasons why vegetarianism is in fact a much more ethical eating practice when compared to eating meat. Importantly, we have stuck to the topic. Our introduction reflects the question prompt. We're not writing about nutrition. We're not writing about physiology. We're writing about ethics and vegetarianism. We stick to the prompt, and that is absolutely critical. And we learned that, as I said, this essay will is the critical sentence because it will construct your paragraphs. So let's look at argument 1 and argument 2. This is what we did in the last webinar. So argument 1, argument 2, follow your introduction. And we talked about flow. We talked about 3 possible essay structures. We talked about that this essay will agree. If you, in your introduction, you tell the reader that you're going to agree, then in your argument 1, you should agree, and in your argument 2, you should agree. This is the first possible overall essay structure and flow that you can do. The second possible overall essay structure and flow is where in the introduction, you say this essay will disagree. Then in your argument 1, you disagree. In your argument 2, you also disagree. That's the second possible overall structure. It all depends on the question prompt and on the day of your test. So you should understand all 3 of these possible essay flows. The third one is the mixed one, where in your introduction you say, you know what? Vegetarianism is ethical, however, there are some unethical aspects as well. So then in your argument 1, you will agree and talk about how it's ethical, and then in your argument 2, you'll disagree and talk about how it's also has some unethical bits. This is a more complex structure and flow to your essay, but it is possible, and this is the third way to do it. We also learned in the last webinar that each paragraph, each of your argument paragraphs has a certain structure and has an inherent logic. We learned that the paragraph has an opening sentence, which is broad and introduces what the paragraph will be about. For example, vegetarianism is more ethical than eating meat because it does not harm animals. It has a single topic, and this introduces this paragraph And I know that this paragraph will be about ethics and harming animals and vegetarianism. We learned that then you write a support sentence which adds information to your first sentence, your opening sentence. Clearly, harming animals causes suffering, which is unethical. We then learned that you should provide some evidence. For example, millions of chickens are killed each day for human consumption. And finally, you write a closing sentence which goes back to that opening sentence and closes off the paragraph. Vegetarians do not participate in the killing of animals, which is a much more ethical practice than eating meat. All the while, we're talking about the question prompt. We're never talking about digestion. We're never talking about physiology or health or nutrition. We're talking about vegetarianism, ethics, and we're telling the reader what we said we would tell them. We also learned that there's a certain logic to this sort of structure. When you write a paragraph that does have an opening, a support, evidence, and a closing, it has a certain logic, a cyclical structure that is a very good thing. I also told you that e2language.com has over 50 video-based lessons on how to do this. So if you need extra help, go to E2. You may have to upgrade your account. Right, in this one, we're going to look at how to pull it all together by writing a beautiful conclusion. I'm going to quickly check the Q&A. Okay, Priyanka says, is it necessary to write examples for both body paragraphs? Yes, good question. I'm also looking at some other questions here. When typing the essay, should the introduction, argument 1, argument 2, and conclusion be in separate paragraphs or in one solid block of text? Great question, Runika. Make sure they're in separate paragraphs. Put a line between your paragraphs. You want the introduction to be separate from the first paragraph, separate from the third, and separate from the conclusion. Never write in capital letters. If you write your essay in capital letters, you will get 0. Make sure you use a capital letter at the start of the sentence, etc. Use correct punctuation. Format, as you said, was important. Maksud, I'm just about to talk about the conclusion. I'm going to give you the formula for that. Fungdo says, do we always need 4 sentences in paragraph 1, like your example? Not necessarily. If you're a competent, confident writer, you can write more, but you don't need to. In fact, the introduction, the 3-sentence introduction, the 4-sentence paragraphs, and the 3-sentence conclusion will be sufficient to cover your 200 words. Okay. Yes, I did just say leave a line between the paragraphs. Okay, anonymous viewer says, with regards to the flow, the third one where you agree and disagree and then agree and then disagree and then come to a conclusion, will that score a more higher mark? No, not necessarily. It all depends on the structure. I'm going to say no. Okay, VJ says, can we write 2 different ideas in a paragraph? No, don't do that. The topic sentence, that opening sentence, introduces your paragraph and you should have one idea. A paragraph is a single idea. It should just be one idea. You can't have a paragraph that talks about harming animals and destroying the environment in the one paragraph. That's illogical. You must have, your paragraph must have be about a single theme. Let me turn off my phone there. All right, everyone's asking 100,000 questions. Oh my God, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to tell you about the conclusion, the formula for writing the conclusion, okay? I'll try and answer some more questions at the end. Right, conclusion formula. As I said, your essay has 4 parts: intro, argument 1, argument 2, and conclusion. Your conclusion should contain 2 sentences. The first sentence is a "this essay discussed" sentence that briefly mentions your argument 1 and argument 2. And your second sentence is an "in my opinion" sentence where you rewrite the third sentence of your introduction. If you remember, the third sentence of your introduction is the "this essay will" sentence. This Conclusion is the best way to finish your essay. It is the most logical, it is the most coherent, it makes sense, it writes well, it reads well. The computer will love it because it's searching for all of those connections between your intro, your paragraphs, and your conclusion. For example, let me just move me. This essay discussed the first sentence. This essay discussed how vegetarian eating practices do not harm animals or damage the environment. We can see here that we have referred back to our two arguments in our first and second paragraph about harming animals and damaging the environment. We have just briefly mentioned them again here. Again, this essay discussed. If you remember in the introduction, we tell the reader this essay will discuss. Now we're saying in the conclusion, this essay discussed, past tense, because it's already happened. We've told the reader what we were going to tell them. Second sentence is the in my opinion sentence. In my opinion, comma, vegetarianism is a far more ethical practice than eating meat. Where does this come from? This comes from the introduction, the third sentence of the introduction, where you say this essay will discuss the reasons why vegetarianism is much more ethical than eating meat. In the conclusion, you rewrite that again, but in different words, and say, in my opinion, vegetarianism is a far more ethical practice than eating meat. We now have a beautiful essay from beginning to end. Let's put it all together. So this was the question prompt. Vegetarianism is a more ethical practice than eating meat. Discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with this statement. Support your point of view with reasons and or examples from your own experience or observations. Introduction, 3 sentences, background statement, rewrite the question, and then tell the reader what you will tell them. Vegetarianism has become increasingly popular in recent times. This is my background sentence. It's broad. It introduces the topic. Now I'm going to rewrite the question. Here's the question. Vegetarianism is a more ethical practice than eating meat. People often choose to become vegetarian because it is considered to be more ethical than being a meat eater. Third sentence. Tell the reader what you will tell them. This essay will discuss the reasons why vegetarianism is in fact a much more ethical eating practice when compared to eating meat. We have our structure that leads down like this. Then we move into argument 1, which follows on from your introduction. So I said this essay will discuss the reasons why vegetarianism is more ethical. Argument 1, remember, 4-sentence paragraph. Opening, support, evidence, closing. Opening sentence, vegetarianism is more ethical than eating meat because it does not harm animals. Clearly, harming animals causes suffering, which is unethical. For example, here's our evidence. Millions of chickens are killed each day for human consumption. Closing sentence, vegetarians do not participate in the killing of animals, which is a much more ethical practice than eating meat. Argument 2, 4 sentences. Opening, support, evidence, closing. This time, this paragraph is about impact on the environment, which is an ethical implication. Vegetarianism is also much more ethical than eating meat because its impact on the environment is far less. Support sentence. Growing vegetables is good for the environment, whereas farming animals impacts the environment. Evidence. Beef cattle, for instance, destroy topsoil and damage the atmosphere. Closing. Vegetarianism is a more ethical practice because it does not harm the natural world. Now we move to the conclusion. And as I said, the first sentence, this essay discussed, refers to your argument 1 and your argument 2. It specifically refers to that first sentence you write. Let's have a look. This essay discussed why vegetarianism is more ethical than eating meat because it does not harm animals and it does not damage the environment. Let me get out my pen here. I'm going to do some drawing on the screen, which is always dangerous because I lose my cursor. Okay. Okay, not harm animals. Not harm animals. Not damage the environment. Not damage the environment. You can see how my conclusion is linked, is restating my argument 1 and argument 2 in different words. Then the second sentence of my conclusion, in my opinion, and then in my opinion, vegetarianism is a far more ethical practice than eating meat, full stop, end of essay. Now, where did that come from? That came from the introduction and the third sentence that said this essay will discuss in my why vegetarianism is in fact a much more ethical eating practice when compared to eating meat. All I've done here is rewritten that in different words. You will get a chance in a second to write an introduction. Let me just continue a little bit, then we'll do some Q&A. No, let's do the Q&A now, actually. Okay. Anonymous viewer says, is it better to give your opinion in the introduction and confirm it again in the conclusion? No. In the introduction, you tell the reader what you will tell them. This essay will discuss these reasons. Then you give the reasons, and then you say in the conclusion, this essay discussed these reasons, and here's my opinion. That's the best way to write this essay. Maria says, is your essay more than 200 words? Yes. I'm presuming, I haven't actually counted, but I assume it is. In the PTE, you will see a word counter. So when you're typing, it will go 173, 174, 175. So you don't have to manually count the words like you do in the IELTS test. Okay. Anonymous viewer says, hi Jay, should we also introduce, no, let's just, don't try to restructure the structure. This structure works, this structure's good. Okay, VJ's asked about, can we write one for paragraph and one against paragraph? What do we do in the conclusion? The same thing, exactly the same thing. So if you write a for paragraph and you say, yes, vegetarianism is more ethical, and then you write a second paragraph and you say, however, vegetarianism does have ethical implications. So you've got a for and an against. In your conclusion, it's the same structure. First of all, you refer in your first sentence, this essay discussed argument 1, for, and argument 2, against. Then you say, in my opinion, because you're weighing them up, you see, you're weighing them up. You're saying, yes, it's ethical, but there's unethical. In my opinion, I think overall, it is more ethical, even though I've looked at both of those options. Okay. Okay, Dylan says, hi Jay, are you sure we can write all of this in 20 minutes? Dylan, you have to write 200 words anyway. You have two options here. You can go into the PTE without a formula in your head and you can just freestyle and just write. It's not a good idea because the PTE is very stressful. It's very hard to think clearly on test day. Anxiety happens. Confusion happens. It's an overwhelming experience. The best thing you can do is walk into that exam with this formula in your mind. It's kind of like cheating. It's kind of like having it in your pocket, except if you have it in your pocket, you'll get kicked out of the exam. But if you have it in your brain, it's not cheating. It's called intelligence. And it will also make your essay writing faster. If you know that your first sentence is to, I've completely forgotten what the first sentence, the introduction, the first sentence, oh my God, I'm gonna have to go back because I'm having a brain meltdown. The broad statement, of course, the broad statement, then it will actually decrease the amount of time that you spend thinking about that sort of thing. Let me check some other questions. Jennifer's got a good question. She says, how long do you suggest we take notes before starting to type? It's critical that you think about what your arguments will be. You need to think about the flow. When you get a question prompt that says something like, is vegetarianism more ethical than eating meat? Immediately for me, it's very clear that it is. Therefore, I'm going to agree and agree. I then need to spend a minute or two thinking about what my two arguments will be, what my argument one will be, and what my argument two will be. If I think about vegetarianism, I think about harming animals. It's very clear. That's my first argument. And I will write a single paragraph about that. My second paragraph, it's a bit more difficult to think. It gives me about 30 seconds. I can think of, okay, impacting the environment is also an ethical implication. Okay, cool. Okay, I'm going to move on. I don't want to spend too much time. If you have any questions, please email hello@e2language.com. We will answer your questions. Right, so we talked about paragraphs having an inherent logic, how the opening sentence links to the supporting sentence, links to the evidence, and links to the closing sentence. The overall essay should also have that kind of logic, where the introduction links to argument one, links to argument two, links to the conclusion, and the conclusion links back to the introduction. This is how you write a good essay. Logic is a smiley face. So overall, we looked at the introduction with the formula, which was a background statement, a basic statement about the question prompt. Then you rewrite that question in your own words, and then you tell the reader what you will tell them. You basically tell the reader what your first and second paragraph will be about. We learned that the paragraph formula is opening sentence, support sentence, evidence, and closing. And the conclusion was this essay discussed and in my opinion. Now it's your turn. I want you to write a conclusion. Here's the question prompt. Mandatory electoral voting systems function better than free choice voting systems. In other words, making people vote on election day by law is a better process than allowing them to vote by choice. Discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with this statement. Support your point of view with reasons and or examples, blah, 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 blah. I've written the basic structure for you. Now what I want you to do is to write a conclusion for it. The introduction, the third sentence, sentence 3, says, this essay will discuss the reasons why compulsory voting is more advantageous than free voting. So I've chosen essay structure flow number 1, where I will agree and agree and agree. Okay, this essay will discuss the reasons why compulsory voting is more advantageous than free voting. My argument 1 is that compulsory voting guarantees large voter turnout. Many people will go to the election. And argument 2 is that compulsory voting reduces the possibility of corruption. Now I want you to write a conclusion. This essay discussed, I want you to briefly mention argument 1 and argument 2. In my opinion, I want you to rewrite this. So overall, I want you to do this. I'm going to give you 4 minutes to do this, okay? Starting from now. Okay, we're starting to get a few through now. Good, good. See, what an excellent way to write an introduction. Oh, good stuff, Srinivas. That's excellent. Well done. Jennifer Fang, well done. Mitigated. That's a beautiful word. Well done. Good, Veronica. Good. Everyone's written fantastic conclusion here. Good. Excellent. 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 Easy. Easy. Everyone's done this beautifully. Well done. I'll read out a few in a second. Okay. Okay, Shashank says, this essay discussed how compulsory voting ensures large voter turnout and reduces the possibility of corruption in voting systems. In my opinion, compulsory voting is much more advantageous than free voting. Beautiful. Randa says, this essay discussed how compulsory voting guarantees large voter turnout and reduces the possibility of corruption. In my opinion, it is far more beneficial than free voting. Good. You want to try and rewrite it in different words. Try and use different words than the introduction and the argument 1 and argument 2. Caroline says, this essay discussed why making voting compulsory is more advantageous than free voting as far as I am concerned. According to the reasons we have analysed above, the merits of compulsory voting make it outweigh the free voting system. Good, a few little errors, not bad. Zubair says, this essay discussed compulsory voting not only guarantees huge turnout, but also helps in controlling corruption. In my opinion, compulsory voting is advantageous and outweighs free voting. Good, let me see a few from here. Okay, let's say Maria Hadi says, this essay discussed how mandatory voting can increase the number of people who contribute to the voting and how the corruption can be reduced. In my opinion, compulsory voting has more benefits than free voting. Fantastic. Good. Bella says, this essay discussed the compulsory voting guarantees large voter turnout and decreases the feasibility of corruption. In my opinion, compulsory... Good. Excellent. Look, I'm happy with that. Everyone seems to have nailed it. I'll give you my conclusion here, which is very similar to everybody else's. It says, this essay discussed how compulsory voting increases the number of voters and decreases the possibility of rigged elections. In other words, corruption. I believe that. Here's a little thing. All right, let me get out my pen. Let's put this together. Right, so 2 parts, 2 sentences. Here's the second sentence here. This essay discussed how compulsory voting increases the number of voters, guarantees large voter turnout. I've rewritten it in different words, increases the number of voters, decreases the possibility of rigged elections, reduces the possibility of corruptions. I've used different words, I've paraphrased. That's how you write your first sentence. You use your argument 1, you use your argument 2. Second sentence. I believe that compulsory voting is a much better system than electoral systems that give voters the choice to vote or not. In other words, this essay will discuss the reasons why compulsory voting is more advantageous than free voting. This says the same thing as this, but just in different words. Cool. Everyone seemed to do that very well. I think that's an excellent way to write an introduction. Any questions? Any questions? Just quickly. Say, I think you need to watch the other webinars. Satish. Okay, Satish is asking about putting spaces between words. 1 space between each word. Never do 2 or 3. I don't know why you would do that. Cool. Everyone looks good. Now I've lost my notes back. Good. Does this formula work? Has it been proven? The answer is yes. Here's my PTE report card, 90, 90, 90, 90. Here's Kaya's. She also works at e2language.com, 90, 90, 90, 90. In fact, she got better scores than me. I'm slightly jealous. Preparation. Preparation's key. You now understand how the structure and the formulas work. Okay? You know how to write the introduction. You know how to write the paragraphs. You know now how to write the conclusion. It's now up to you to prepare properly for this. Knowing it's one thing, practicing it is the other thing. Without practice, it's meaningless. And on test day, I don't know if it'll help you that much. You need to build your skills. You need to understand vocabulary. You need to be able to understand and use grammar well. You also should watch the essay videos on e2language.com. We also have a pronunciation app there. Test strategy, well, you've just learned that in this webinar. Test practice, you can submit essays through e2language.com and get written feedback, or if you sign up, you can actually get one-on-one feedback with the teacher, and the teacher will look at your essay, go through the structures, make sure that you're writing it well for grammar, vocabulary, coherence, everything that the PTE computer is looking for. If you haven't already, I strongly recommend that you upgrade your account so you can get some expert feedback. Let's just do a couple of minutes on questions, and then I'm going to have some dinner. Do we have face-to-face classes? We have one-on-one tutorials at the moment, and also these webinars, says Zubair. Caroline says, if I write 3 body paragraphs, don't write 3 body paragraphs. Nish says, my Q&A is not working. Sorry about that. Let's have a look. VJ says, if we get stuck in the conclusion, can we end without using paraphrasing? Look, if you're really running out of time, fine, but try to make the time to paraphrase the conclusion, to rewrite it in different words. Adeji says, please do a webinar on idea generation, how to generate ideas for the topics. Great idea. I'll note that down. Mark says, how should we write the last sentence in the introduction if we are going with the complex structure? This essay will discuss the reasons why vegetarianism is ethical, but also how there are unethical implications to being a vegetarian. That's one way. I have mentioned a for and an against in that sentence. Hattie says, should I try to use as much vocabulary as I can? Only use words that you are confident are correct, because if you're using incorrect words, the computer will know. Whoa, my slideshow just ended. Sorry about that. Okay, Satish says, do we get more than 1 prompt at questions in essay? Satish, you only get 1 question prompt, but you may get 2 essays. There is a combination where you get different number of summarized written texts and write essays. You may be unfortunate enough to get 2 essays on the day. Ganesh says, before the paragraph, do we need to leave a tab space? No, just leave a space between the paragraphs. You don't need to indent your paragraphs. Sheena says, do a webinar for retail lecture. We already have one. It's on the website. Anonymous viewer says, if the essay doesn't ask for your opinion, should we still write a conclusion? It will always ask for your opinion. It's an argumentative essay. So this structure, no matter what question prompt you get, this structure will work for you. VJ says, will this webinar be uploaded to e2language.com? Yes, it will. Jennifer says, there's a problem solution type of essay in PTE. No, there's not. They're only argumentative essays. I have never seen a problem solution essay in the PTE. I'm almost entirely sure. Cool. Hattie's got a good question. He or she says, how much time should we spend on revision at the end? If you finish and you have 4 minutes left, use those 4 minutes to read your essay very carefully to make sure that the grammar's right, the vocabulary's right, the spelling's right, the punctuation's right, the structure's right, the format's right. Get it right before that clock hits 20 minutes. Cool. All right. I have to wrap this up. That's 35 minutes. I want to keep them a bit short. Any questions, go to write an email to hello@e2language.com. Do consider upgrading your account if you haven't. We are certainly the best preparation provider for the PTE out there. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this webinar, and I hope that you join me next Thursday for the PTE reading mock test, the live mock test. That will be fun. Cool. Anyway, have a good evening, everybody. It was nice to teach you again, and I will see you soon.